You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Toronto Sports Rush channel, brought to you by the Bet Rivers Network. I am joined today by lead NHL analyst, Mr. EJ Hradek. EJ, there's so much movement. There's so many things happening in this offseason. They say a Toronto Maple Leafs season never really ends. And we're seeing that right now because let's just look at what's happening today. The Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, MLSE to the layman, is doing their season review today, and a hot topic on the internet right now, and something you brought up with me quite a while back. Actually, we talked off air, but you tweeted this on May 19th in the afternoon. With Maple Leafs president, alternative governor Brendan Shanahan's contract set to expire on June 30th, I could see him sliding into an upper management role with the New York Islanders. Interesting times ahead. And now, as of yesterday, it's broken online that he has been given permission to talk to the New York Islanders.
Yeah, I mean, once I learned that Shanahan's contract was expiring on June 30th, and Arthur Staple covers the Islanders for The Athletic, had reported that. Once that was a fact that we could confirm, I thought there was a really good chance that he would end up talking to the Islanders because John Collins is doing the search. John Collins is one of the partners. He runs the business operations for the Islanders. He's running the search for their new management group. He's been interviewing general managers, different people to try to figure out which way they're going to go. John Collins and Brendan Shanahan worked together at the NHL. John Collins was, I believe, a CEO, a business guy there. Previously had worked for the Cleveland Browns. He's been involved in different sports over many years. He's known more as a sports business guy than he is someone that really understands, building a hockey team. And so the fact that Collins is looking, Shanahan may be available. We don't know how the situation, and now we do know how it ended in Toronto. It just seemed like it made sense. And then talking to different people around the league, the people I talked to that would know, told me, yeah, they wouldn't be surprised at all if, these two came together. So they're going to talk. They have the ability to talk now. It's official, and we'll see where it goes. But you get the sense when MLSE allows for Brendan to talk to the Islanders and his contract is expiring, that his career in Toronto is in peril. So, we'll see which way it goes. And, interestingly enough, I tweeted that on Monday. I was at my daughter's graduation at Boston College, and literally 10 minutes later, I saw Brendan Shanahan on the floor of the stadium at BC. He was there to celebrate the graduation of his two sons, so it was kind of coincidental. I did not speak to him as he was engaged in family matters at the time, and he's a very proud father. So, it was just an odd coincidence. But we'll see how it plays out. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if he ends up there because it seems like they're moving towards a separation in Toronto. And if Brendan wants to keep working, I think he's got a great opportunity to kind of slide into a similar role with the Islanders.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations to your daughter. That's wonderful news. Secondly, he's had a long time to execute on a plan. And there's, this offseason for the Leafs is so complicated because it's not just that they're out of the playoffs, it's the way they went out of the playoffs and all of these things. And at some point, the fit just doesn't work anymore. And it's not so much a referendum on him as much as it's time to move on from certain people from the front office to the ice. And Shanahan is probably on that list. And as you say, for him too, he can build a new chapter of his career now with this and start anew and start afresh with another strong franchise.
Yeah, I would say, when I look back, and listen, we don't know how it's going to play out. One thing we know about Brendan Shanahan, he is he's a savvy guy, and he's a charming guy, and he was obviously a great, great player. And, so I wouldn't necessarily say that his days with Toronto are over until they're over, because he may have a desire to stay there, and maybe he's able to, mend fences within their group if there are any to be mended, or talk to the people that would keep him in line there in the job. I mean, Keith Pelley is kind of the guy that he would be next up the chain that he would have to convince to stay. But so we're not 100% sure at the time that we are taping this where he's going to go. But I would just say the overview for Shanahan in Toronto is simple to me. He did a lot of good things. He went for the total rebuild at the start. There was pain. That first year, the team was not very good, obviously, but it led to them getting high draft picks. They were able to successfully go out and make those picks. I mean, it's not that hard normally to number one overall if you're lucky, which they were, that a guy like Austin Matthews was available in that particular year. Oddly enough, the Islanders have the first overall pick in the draft this year. And, there's not a player like Austin Matthews in the draft this year. So, I mean, they were fortunate that the timing was good with them having that pick. They were able to get Marner with a fourth pick, I believe it was, Nylander with a high pick. So Shanahan went in there with the plan to rebuild from the ground up, and he did that, and he did it in relatively quick time when you think about 3 or 4 year window. So that, I think those were all positive things. I think the problem for Brendan and the plan that they had was he turned the franchise over to me, inexperienced guys in Kyle Dubas and then as coach Sheldon Keefe, both of whom were in their first NHL jobs in their respective, fields. As the general manager of the Leafs and as the head coach of the Leafs. These guys had not held those positions in the National Hockey League before. And I'm not sitting here and saying, hey, you have to have had that experience. But I think when you're in those roles for the Toronto Maple Leafs, you'd like to have somebody that has cut his teeth somewhere, and we've seen him do something somewhere else. In fact, Lou Lamoriello was the general manager in the run-up to Kyle Dubas taking over. That was the plan that Shanahan put forth, that Lamoriello would kind of mentor in some ways Kyle Dubas, and Kyle Dubas would just succeed Lamoriello eventually ended up leaving, going to the Islanders himself. So there is a lot of connections with the Islanders. John Tavares, of course, that's all part of it. And that was another thing. I thought the acquisition of John Tavares, while Tavares is a terrific player, there's no question about that, was the need for the Leafs at that time with Matthews, Marner, Nylander, another high-end, high-dollar offensive player in a salary cap league. So while Tavares came in and played very well for the Leafs, the bottom line is it made it more difficult for them, if not impossible, to help build their defense and their goaltending. So these are the things for me when I look at it, Kyle, is like, that's where the plan went amiss to me. I think they should have had a more experienced hand as the manager, maybe a more experienced hand as the coach. And we see now with Berube and with Trey Living, these guys have done, I think, very well in a short period of time. And when I looked at this past series and the mistakes that get made by the Marners and the Nylanders from a defensive standpoint, like, I don't feel they were ever really held accountable by the previous regime to, on a day-to-day basis of being benched if needed, to, be moved around the lineup more. I mean, I don't think there was enough accountability to teach these guys the lessons necessary to win at the most important time.
Yeah, you raise a very good point about, the executives and the coaching staff that he surrounded himself with in Toronto. We can't pretend that it's the same thing as building that team in Utah. It's just not. The level of pressure and we're doing this show right now because of that level of pressure. This show doesn't exist in Utah. No. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out, where he goes. He'll land on his feet, and they'll land on their feet too, but it seems like they've reached a breaking point where it's time for some sort of regime and culture change there, and it will likely start with him because of circumstance and because of the history and whatnot. But he wasn't alone in all of this. It was a team effort to get here, and now they've got a number of both restricted and unrestricted free agents, and we have to start with Mitch Marner. After the way the last game ended, it's very tough for me to picture him returning to Toronto, if that's even on the table at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably on the table. I think they would like to talk to Mitch, but your point is really well taken. I mean, it's the same thing. It's timing. Shanahan's contract is expiring, so they have to make a decision, and they could make a decision to go. Looks like they're going to move on, right? That's what seems to be what's going to happen there. Mitch Marner's contract is up, right? Like the Austin Matthews contract was up. We'd be maybe talking about what his situation was, right? Yeah. But the timing of this, Marner's contract is up. His agent is Darren Ferris. They wanted to, most of the time with his clients, he wants to go to free agency, which is the way to probably push for the highest dollar amount. Mitch has said in the past, he's a Toronto kid. He loves playing for the Leafs. He talked a little bit in the past tense the other day in the clean out day. But again, that would be really parsing his words quite a bit. I think that there will be a conversation, but the problem for me, Kyle, is simply this. I mean, he wants a lot of money. And, I just think to bring him back at that dollar amount would be really difficult for the team. He's a terrific player. He's done terrific things for this team. I just think for him, I've seen some growth in his game for sure in terms of what it takes when it really matters, So there's been growth, but unfortunately the contract is up now. Do you want to make the investment of maybe $13 million in this player? I get the sense that they're going to go in another direction, and I think Mitch is seemingly thinking about going in another direction. There'll be plenty of suitors, but the only thing where I would say there's still an option there is that he's a Toronto kid that has said that he loved playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So maybe he'll decide if he goes to market. We've seen Steven Stamkos go to market and then decide to come back to Tampa in years past. So we'll just have to see. But if I'm wagering on it, I'm going to think that he's leaving via free agency.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And you raised a good point, too. Like what he said in the hours post game, I try not to hold that against players too much because it's the heat of the moment. Obviously, it was very emotional, but truth be told, so much of our conversation, so much of the conversation around this team right now, it really comes down to how embarrassing those last two home losses were. They weren't good. It was not a good look. There's no shame in losing to the defending Stanley Cup champions. Obviously, the high bar they were reaching, we got to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. We have to play well in the Eastern Conference Finals. They missed it, but the team they lost to definitely looks like the Stanley Cup favorite right now.
Yeah,
and they're the defending Cup champion. There's no shame in that, but again, the culture and regime change, and it leaves them with a whole bunch of interesting questions. You have Tavares coming off an incredible season, but you've already made the point, and it's a fair argument that was he ever the right fit for the team in the first place? No knock on Tavares. He didn't have a great second round, but his season was incredible. He really turned back the clock, and he's going to make a lot of money off that. And the question is, should the Leafs, again, down to money, should they be the ones to spend that money on him?
Yeah, it's a great question because he's 34, going to be 35, and he did have a great year. But as the playoffs wore on, particularly against Florida, now again, as you point out, really good team, right? Yeah. And defending Stanley Cup champions may win again, but he didn't have a lot of impact really in that 7-game series with Florida, and it seemed to get lesser as it went along, and that's just the nature of things. And so again, what's the price tag? And if Marner leaves, does that change things? Do you want to try to keep Tavares because you're losing Marner?
Sure.
And then what's the term for Tavares? If it's 2 years, it's kind of one thing. If it's 3 years, it's another thing. I mean, these are all things they have to consider. And what do they want to do on the free agent market? I mean, do they want to really make a big pitch for Sam Bennett? Do they want to go out and try to woo Brad Marchand to come into Toronto, which would kind of have a certain kind of twist to it? Right?
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, do they want to go out and add other pieces to the puzzle? Do they want to trade some of the pieces they have? I mean, Morgan Riley is under contract through 2030. He makes $7.5 million a year. This is a guy into his early 30s now who, again, I watch this team closely all year long, and he's a good player, but if you're looking to get all the way to the end, maybe you've got to upgrade that if you can. Sure. And maybe you just need a bigger, stronger player in that role. And so would they broach Morgan Riley about the possibility of moving him? Again, he has a no-move clause. So he controls that whole operation unless they want to try to circumvent that somehow. We've seen that with the Rangers, with some of the guys they've had to pressure players to move off that. Now, they may feel good about Riley, so they may just decide, listen, it doesn't make sense to move him, or they may not feel like there's a deal out there that makes sense for their team. But I think they have to lay all options on the table, and I think they have to do it carefully because this is still to me, a very good team. It was a team that I thought made a lot of strides this year. I'll say it one more time. I've said it all year long. More of a contender than a pretender. I stand by that. I think this team, they went 7 with with Florida. It played out in a way that isn't appealing to the fan, right? Because you're up 2-0. You're up 2 goals in game 3. You lost those 2 home games in kind of embarrassing fashion.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't maybe feel that way, but I think the team made a lot of strides this year. I think Berube is a good fit for this group in helping them get to the next level. I think Brad Treliving has done a pretty good job adding pieces to the puzzle. So I think whatever they do this offseason, whether it be with Marner, with Tavares, getting Matthew Nye signed as a restricted free agent, I mean, all these moves, changing, adding pieces to the defense, like all these moves have to be done carefully because I think the Toronto Maple Leafs clearly want to continue to be in the mix to win. So when you lose a player like Marner, like it looks like they will, how do they replace him? Who comes in? How do they make that team look a little harder to
Right.
play against when it matters most?
Yeah, because I mean, if you're going to lose some firepower, you're going to want to add some back line. You have to compensate somewhere for it all, and you wonder too because we've discussed this all year long, and they very much have built a 1A and 1B goaltending situation, but those guys won't stay cheap forever either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're spending what they're getting back for goaltending is the bargain of the century right now, and that won't stay that way forever. So there's and you mentioned Nyes, he seems like he did have a good playoffs. His hustle was there. It seems like there was a lot of heart on the ice. You bring him back, and maybe that's the way you build from it. But to lose the firepower of both Marner and Tavares, you have to compensate for that. Maybe one of them you can get away with because one of the other guys can step up and fill some of those stat categories for the Leafs. But to lose both of them, that seems like a little bit more of a difficult task in the offseason.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would think that, you talk about job one right now. I think job one is getting Matthew Nye signed because he is a restricted free agent. We saw last year, the St. Louis Blues got in an offer sheet on a couple of players there. Holloway, the forward, and Broberg, the defenseman. The Oilers chose not to match because they had kind of dug themselves into a little bit of salary cap. Hell, the cap is going up this year, so that's great. But I think Nyes is somebody they want to get under contract and probably get under contract for, maybe the 8 years. I mean, he's the kind of guy that can help you win. I mean, he's a big, strong power forward that has good hands. And I thought he played well until the end of the series when it seemed like he got dinged up a little bit down the stretch of that series against Florida. But he was very impressive to me. So I think that's job one. And then obviously in concert with that, figure out where things are going with Marner, ultimately, and then decide what you want to do with John Tavares. I think that's probably, they probably would love to keep him, but it's a matter of term and money and, what's acceptable to John because, he's talked about his love for the Leafs over the years. It's why he came here to begin with. What is that worth to him to stay in Toronto? So, these are the questions. But job one for me is getting Matthew Nyes taken care of because you don't want to be in a situation that goes into July where other teams could, their cap's going up. Somebody might put some kind of crazy offer sheet out there. I think the Leafs would match it. So it's not that concerned, but you're matching on other terms other than your own. So I would think that, they would want to try to get that done.
One last point about Tavares I'd like to hear your thoughts on. In the offseason last year, he relinquished the captaincy. They made Austin Matthews the captain. But we discussed it throughout the year. It had been discussed ad nauseum online and stuff. John Tavares was very much still a captain of the team. So forget the production on the ice. What about the production off the ice that he brings with that leadership role that he clearly took right from the press conference where they announced this? That's a different type of hole that the Leafs would need to fill. Do they have a guy in the locker room that can step into that? Because I don't think Austin Matthews is capable of handling both those roles. He hasn't been in the league long enough. There's a lot of pressure on him. Tavares was in a unique spot with him. If he goes, who fills that role of the unofficial captaincy of the hockey team?
Well, I think he's part of the leadership group. I mean, I guess that's the best way to say it. I think Matthews is, capable of doing these things within the room. I mean, you and I are not in that room when no one else is in there, right? So I do think, Matthews he says he's going to, that's another thing. He said he was hurt in training camp, and we talked about it throughout the year, Kyle. He was in Germany and he came back and he was clearly not 100%, but I thought he did a lot of things well. He just didn't score to the level that he normally scores at. And, I just recently saw like the Sports Logic stats on puck battles in the playoffs, and he was first. So, I mean, there was a lot of things that he did really well.
Yes.
I think it's nice to have, your leadership group. Tavares, if he would depart, that would impact the team. But most importantly, again, to lose both those guys, that's a significant chunk of offense. I mean, that's, what is that, like 60 or 70 goals that you'd have to replace. So, I think it plays in the favor of Tavares that Marner is likely leaving.
Yeah.
Because that would certainly give the Leafs an impetus to want to keep Tavares. I just think the careful part there is the term. And, for a guy that's going to be 35 years old this year and was never a great skater, I think to his credit, he has done so much work on that throughout his career to be as effective as he has been. And he was really good this year. But as we know, that can change quickly. And so I think it's just the decision or how I would react to Tavares staying is really mostly about what the deal looks like. Like if the term and the money are reasonable, then I think he probably stays. But that will be up to John in the end if they can find that place where he's happy.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot more factors at play potentially driving a Marner exit, whereas Tavares, I think the door is a little wider open, but as you say, where he's concerned, it's just the terms. They can't afford to give, with his shortcomings and his age, they have to be very careful with those numbers. Yeah. And it's not a knock on him. It's just the reality of the Leafs situation right now. And we're seeing those changes. So I have a feeling we're going to be back here in these exact same spots over the summer. Because, again, as we started with, the MLSE's end of season review is today. We might know stuff about the situation by the time we go to sleep tonight. Yeah. Or we might have further clues as to what's going to happen. So I think that's a pretty good spot to leave things on, because it seems undoubted that we will be back here to discuss this further.
And we're still waiting really to hear from Brad Tree-Living and from Brendan Shanahan.
Exactly.
If indeed he does talk at some point. So there's, as I ended my tweet earlier in the week, interesting times ahead, because there are a number of really good forwards and some defensemen as well that are available, or going to be available most likely in the free agent market. So if Marner leaves, that's a big chunk of change that you have to spend on others. How will they try to spend it?
It'll be interesting to see, and we will be back here discussing it for sure. Thank you very much, EJ, once again for joining us here in the Toronto Sports Rush. My name is Kyle Andrew. We are brought to you by the Bet Rivers Networks, and we will check in with you soon because, as we state, a Toronto Maple Leafs season never really ends.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.